Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Imagine that you could walk into work every day and feel like you're part of something really important, like a place where you genuinely matter, and the work you do makes a real difference.
It's kind of like a dream job, right?
It does, yeah, like a perfect scenario. But actually, that's what we're going to be exploring today. We're diving deep into Any Dumbass Can Do It by Garry Ridge.
Oh, I love that title.
Yeah, it definitely grabs your attention. And the book itself is full of these really interesting perspectives on leadership and how to build a workplace culture where people actually thrive. So if you're interested in making your work life or the lives of those you lead, more meaningful, then go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for more deep dives like this.
Yeah, definitely do that.
So this book, Any Dumbass Can Do It. The author's Garry Ridge, former CEO of WD-40 Company. And he shares his leadership approach, which is incredibly candid and surprisingly human. You can find a link to the book on Amazon in the description below. And what's really cool about this book is that it doesn't read like your typical business book with all that jargon. It's more like having a really engaging conversation with a leader who's been there and done that.
Right, like someone who's got real world experience to share.
Exactly. And what we're going to unpack today is how embracing your imperfections, those things we often try to hide, and then creating this strong sense of tribe at work and genuinely focusing on people's happiness can lead to some pretty remarkable outcomes. So get ready for some aha moments. You might even shift your perspective on leadership and what it means to be part of a team.
Awesome. I'm ready to jump in. Where do we start?
Well, I think it's important to start with what really shaped Garry Ridge's leadership philosophy, like that core belief.
Hmm.
He actually talks about this pivotal moment he had on a flight to Australia, of all places. He'd just finished reading the Dalai Lama, and he had this realization, and I'm going to quote him here. He said, "Our prime purpose in life is to make others happy. And if we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them." It's pretty profound, right?
Absolutely. And what's really striking is how he took this deeply personal sentiment, this idea of making others happy, and he made it the foundation of his approach at WD-40. It wasn't just about selling a product, it became about building a culture where people actually enjoyed coming to work.
Exactly. And that idea, like you said, it flows directly into his concept of tribe.
Mm.
Now, he drew inspiration from Sebastian Junger's work and actually expanded on it to define a tribe in the context of a workplace. He describes it as a group that comes together to support each other's growth and well-being. They protect and feed each other. They're dedicated to learning and teaching. They're guided by these strong shared values. They respect different talents, and they're all looking towards the future.
It's a really holistic vision, isn't it?
It really is.
What really stands out to me in that definition is the emphasis on both learning and teaching. It's not just one or the other. And Rich makes this fascinating connection to Indigenous Australian cultures, where elders patiently pass down essential skills to the younger generations. And that's all about ensuring the long-term well-being of the community.
Right.
It's a much more, I guess you could say, nurturing and long-term perspective on development than what we often see in a lot of companies today, which can be very rushed and individualistic.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like they're saying, we're investing in you for the long haul. And those shared values, it's not just about having them written somewhere, like on a poster in the break room. Ridge really emphasizes how these values create a sort of protective environment. They provide a framework for how things are done. And importantly, they actually empower people to do their best work.
Yeah, and it's because everyone's on the same page, right?
Right, exactly. There's this shared understanding of what the team stands for. So, as you're listening to this, think about your own workplace. Does it feel like a tribe in that sense? Are those elements of shared learning and clearly defined values present for you?
It's a great question to reflect on. And if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, this focus on shared values and purpose is really all about building psychological safety. When people feel safe and supported because of those shared values, they're much more likely to take risks, to be innovative, and to collaborate openly without constantly worrying about being judged or punished if they make a mistake.
Oh, absolutely. And that future-oriented aspect is so key too. It's like this collective mindset of always looking ahead, being open to new ideas and adapting together. It's not about just maintaining the status quo.
Right. It's about evolving and growing as a team.
And, in the end, Ridge argues that these shared experiences within the tribe, the learning together, the commitment to those values, the focus on the future, all contribute to that feeling of belonging, that sense that you matter. And he sees that as absolutely crucial for workplace happiness.
It makes sense, right? It's about feeling connected to something bigger than yourself and knowing that your contributions are valued by the group.
Absolutely. And speaking of feeling valued, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about a concept that might seem a little counterintuitive at first. Embracing dumbassery. Now, before you think I'm encouraging everyone to become incompetent, hold on. What Rid is actually advocating for here is the power of humility.
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, it's about being willing to admit what you don't know. And he actually argues that this simple act can take a lot of pressure off everyone and create space for others to show their expertise.
It's so refreshing to hear a leader talk about that. It really speaks to the importance of vulnerability, right? Like not being afraid to show that you don't have all the answers. And Ridge actually shares a personal story from early in his career. He was in a senior leadership meeting and he was totally lost. But when he finally admitted that he was confused, everyone else in the room, they didn't criticize him. They actually sighed in relief.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It is. What's insightful about that story is that his willingness to be vulnerable actually empowered others who were feeling the same way but were too afraid to say anything.
It's like he gave them permission to be human.
Exactly.
And, out of that willingness to say, I don't know, came what he calls the maniac pledge.
The maniac pledge, what's that?
It's this powerful commitment to taking ownership. So, taking responsibility for your actions, asking questions when you need to, finding answers, and making decisions, like not waiting for someone else to tell you what to do. And the key here isn't just about doing things, but fostering a culture where everyone feels empowered to drive solutions, regardless of their position.
I love that. It's about taking initiative and being proactive.
Absolutely. And the Maniac Pledge really reflects this shift away from that traditional top-down boss mentality. Instead, it's more of a coach approach, which Ridge is a huge advocate for.
I can see how that fits in.
Yeah, because a boss kind of dictates and evaluates, but a coach inspires, supports, and focuses on developing the potential in their team. And this idea is perfectly captured in his philosophy of don't mark my paper, help me get an A. It's about the leader's role in fostering growth, not just judging performance.
I see. So instead of pointing out flaws, it's about providing the support needed for someone to actually improve.
Right. It's about helping them learn and get better. And one really effective tool in this coaching approach is to shift from asking why questions to asking what questions.
Interesting. Can you give an example?
Yeah, for sure. So think about the difference between asking why did this happen versus what can we learn from this? The first one, it can sound accusatory, like you're putting someone on the spot. But the second one, it encourages reflection and forward movement.
That's such a subtle but powerful shift in language.
It really is. Because why questions can often make people feel defensive, like they have to justify themselves. But what questions, they create a much safer space for exploration and finding solutions. It shifts the focus from blame to understanding and improvement.
I like that. It's about moving forward together.
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly into the concept of learning moments. Ridge defines a learning moment as a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to benefit all. It's about recognizing that every experience, whether it's a win or a failure, holds valuable lessons for the entire team.
It's about turning those experiences into opportunities for growth.
Precisely. And what's so important here is the emphasis on sharing those learning moments. And he actually tells this great story about Thomas Watson, the former president of IBM. So there was this junior employee who made a really costly mistake. But Watson famously said that he wouldn't fire him because he had just invested $1 million in his education.
Wow, that's quite a perspective.
Right. It highlights the idea that mistakes, when they're openly discussed and analyzed, can become incredibly valuable learning opportunities for the whole organization.
It's about seeing those mistakes as investments in learning.
Exactly. And, to really embed this idea of learning from experiences into WD-40's culture, Ridge actually implemented this year-long program specifically focused on sharing these learning moments. Now, he admits that it was a bit slow to start, mainly because there wasn't a lot of trust at first.
It makes sense. It takes time to build that trust.
Yeah, it does. But by consistently recognizing and even celebrating those who did share their learning moments, and then highlighting the insights that came out of those experiences, he gradually cultivated a culture where people felt safe to be open about what they had learned, even when it involved mistakes.
That ties back to the idea of psychological safety that we talked about earlier, right?
Absolutely. This concept of psychological safety, which researchers like Amy Edmondson have really explored in depth, is so crucial for creating a workplace where people feel comfortable speaking up, asking questions, and even making mistakes without being punished or humiliated. And research has shown that this type of environment is essential for teams to learn, innovate, and adapt effectively, especially in today's world where everything is changing so rapidly.
It's like creating that space where it's okay to be human and to learn from those experiences.
Exactly. And Ridge points out the tangible benefits of this kind of fear-free culture. People feel comfortable asking questions, new ideas are welcome, and when errors do happen, they become opportunities for open discussion and improvement.
So it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Exactly. And as you think about your own workplace, how actively are learning moments identified and shared? And what could you do to create more psychological safety so that people feel comfortable being open about their experiences?
It's a good challenge for us all to consider. How are we creating that space for open and honest dialogue within our own teams?
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something a little more philosophical. The idea of purpose beyond product. Ridge shares that initially WD-40's slogans were kind of tongue-in-cheek, like squeak, smell, and dirt business. Or even because they had a product called 2000 Flushes, #1 in the #2 business.
That's pretty funny.
It is. But he came to realize that a company's purpose needs to resonate on a deeper level, especially for the people who work there. He even asked himself, like, is squeak, smell, and dirt something our team would proudly tell their families and friends about? And the answer, of course, was probably not.
Probably not. It doesn't exactly inspire a sense of purpose, does it?
No, not really. So this led to a big shift in their stated purpose. And they went with something much more meaningful, creating positive, lasting memories for their customers, their team members, and the community. It's a huge difference, right?
It is. It's much more human and relatable.
Exactly. And, Ridge mentions that there was some initial pushback to this new purpose. Some people thought it was too touchy-feely or idealistic.
Yeah, I could see how some people might have been skeptical at first.
Oh, for sure. But he then shares this really powerful story about Ken Blanchard's wife, Margie. She tragically lost everything in a fire, and she said afterwards, the only things that you ever get to keep are the memories that you have. And that really resonated with Ridge. It shifted the focus from just selling a product to creating these meaningful human experiences.
Wow. That's a profound way to think about it.
It really is. And to really support this purpose-driven culture, Ridge outlines what he calls the 4 pillars of a friction-free culture: truth, candor, accountability, responsibility, and trust. Let's take a closer look at each of these.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, so truth and candor, to Ridge, means complete honesty. No lying, no pretending, no hiding. And he emphasizes that leaders need to be willing to hear uncomfortable truths, and team members need to feel safe enough to speak their minds honestly.
I think that goes back to that psychological safety we were talking about earlier. If people are afraid of repercussions for being honest, they're just going to hold back information, which can lead to bad decisions and a breakdown in trust.
Exactly. And Ridge even says that in a truly psychologically safe environment, people actually feel more at risk if they don't speak up.
That's a really interesting point.
It is. So the second pillar is accountability. And Ridge sees this as a two-way street. So leaders are accountable for ensuring that their teams have the resources and support they need to succeed. And the team members are accountable for taking ownership of their responsibilities.
So it's about mutual accountability, not just top-down.
Yeah, exactly. And he points to that maniac pledge we talked about earlier as a great example of this principle in action. The key here is that accountability isn't about blame or punishment. It's about a shared commitment to achieving goals and understanding who's responsible for what.
It's about working together towards a shared outcome.
Right. And then the third pillar is responsibility. This one emphasizes that the success of the company is a shared endeavor. And Ridge uses this great analogy of the blind pass in Australian rugby. So a player throws the ball backward without looking, trusting that a teammate will be there to catch it.
That's a great analogy. It really illustrates the importance of trust and shared responsibility.
It does. And when everyone understands and embraces this shared responsibility, the whole team feels safer to give their full effort and creativity to achieving the company's goals.
It's like everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth pillar is trust. Ridge believes this is built by consistently living out the company's stated values. And he emphasizes that these values need to be authentic and actually guide decision-making at all levels. And he uses their own value of creating positive, lasting memories in all our relationships, as an example. This value promotes trust and respect, not just within the company, but also with customers and partners.
So those values become like the guiding principles for how they interact with everyone, not just internally.
Right, they extend outwards. And, this naturally brings us to the importance of human connection and caring for each other. Ridge tells this very moving story about a healed femur bone that was found from prehistoric times. And he suggests that this discovery indicates the beginning of civilization because it shows that someone stopped to care for another being.
That's a really profound idea.
And it ties into this simple but really powerful question. Hey, you okay?
It's about recognizing the humanity in others and showing that you care.
Absolutely. And Ridge points out how events like the COVID-19 pandemic and natural disasters really underscore how essential those human connections are, especially during tough times.
Oh, absolutely. Those connections are vital for our well-being.
They really are. And he then introduces Martin Seligman's PERMA model for flourishing, which stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And he explains how these elements are so relevant for building a thriving workplace tribe.
It's like a recipe for a fulfilling and positive work experience.
Exactly. And when those elements are present, people not only do better individually, but they also contribute to a better environment for everyone. Now let's talk about leading during times of disruption and uncertainty. Ridge suggests looking at each bullet point on a resume not just as an accomplishment, but as a story of vulnerability and courage.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So it's like looking at each point as a time when someone stepped outside their comfort zone to learn and grow. And he also talks about the messy middle, during times of change, acknowledging that there will be discomfort and uncertainty.
That makes sense. Change can be messy and unpredictable.
It can. And Ridge emphasizes that if a company doesn't have a clear purpose, it's really dangerous, especially when things are uncertain. It creates this void that can easily be filled with anxiety and negativity. But having those clearly defined values acts as an anchor, guiding decision-making and providing stability.
It's like having a compass to guide you through the storm.
Exactly. And he also highlights the importance of authentic communication and projecting realistic confidence, which was especially crucial during the 2008-2009 financial crisis.
Being honest and transparent is so important during those times, but also being realistic about the challenges.
Absolutely. And a key strategy Ridge implemented during that time was to actively involve the entire team in finding solutions. He actually had this program called the Stupid Policies Program, where everyone was empowered to identify and challenge any outdated or ineffective rules. And he also emphasizes the principle of shared sacrifice, where everyone shares a bit of the burden rather than just a few people having to shoulder it all.
I like that idea of shared sacrifice. It fosters a sense of unity and shared responsibility.
It does. And it helps to reinforce that sense of we're all in this together and that we'll get through it together.
It's about facing challenges as a united front.
Exactly. Now let's wrap up with some thoughts on wisdom and personal growth. Ridge is a big advocate for asking the question, how are you better today than you were yesterday? Instead of those typical interview questions.
That's such a simple but powerful question.
It is. And it really highlights the importance of continuous improvement. He also shares how his own personal purpose statement has evolved over time, which shows that self-reflection and growth are ongoing journeys. And he's a strong believer in servant leadership.
Oh, interesting. What does he mean by that?
So he defines it as leadership that's driven by purpose, not by power. And some key characteristics he identifies are a love of learning moments, having a compassionate heart and a strong will, and genuinely caring for the people you lead. And he uses this analogy of the stonemason to illustrate how different levels of understanding your purpose can lead to very different legacies.
That's a great analogy. It's about the impact you leave behind.
It is. And Ridge also draws inspiration from the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. It emphasizes the beauty in imperfection and resilience. And he uses this as a metaphor for how we can reframe life and career changes. Finding strength and beauty in those mended pieces. And instead of thinking about retirement, he proposes the idea of refirement, which is basically reconfiguring your skills and experiences for a new and potentially even more fulfilling phase.
It's a much more positive and empowering way to think about it, not just stopping work, but continuing to contribute in new ways.
Exactly. And he concludes by sharing this quote by Aristotle that really resonated with him. Pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And for Garry Ridge, this captures the essence of leadership. creating an environment where people genuinely enjoy what they do, feel valued for their contributions, and are connected to a purpose that's bigger than themselves.
It's about finding that joy and fulfillment in the work itself.
Absolutely, and that's what it's all about. So thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Garry Ridge's wisdom and his book, Any Dumbass Can Do It. We hope you found these insights valuable.
Yeah, we hope you enjoyed it.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, what resonated most with you about building a thriving workplace tribe. Maybe share your favorite moment or key takeaway in the comments below. And let's keep the conversation going, so please share this deep dive with anyone in your network who you think might benefit from these ideas.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions about creating a better workplace culture, let us know. We might explore them in a future deep dive.
We definitely will. And before we go, here's a final thought to leave you with. Consider just taking one small action today to make someone you work with feel a little more valued or to help foster a stronger sense of belonging within your team.
What kind of impact do you think that one small action could have?
Lots to think about. Thanks again for joining us.
See you next time.